How did these two deeply entrenched countries go from being indirect enemies to the very brink of a regional war? Before 1979, Iran and Israel actually maintained relations. They were not locked in ancient, inevitable combat, and both states recognized mutual geopolitical interests in the Middle East. That changed with the Iranian Revolution. The overthrow of the Shah and the establishment of the Islamic Republic under Ruhollah Khomeini quickly severed diplomatic ties, and the new government adopted a fiercely anti-Israel stance. A sudden domestic regime change took a manageable political landscape and turned it into a long-term ideological threat for Israel. This was the first step up the escalation ladder. For decades following the revolution, both nations avoided a direct state-on-state military conflict. Instead, they engaged in a shadow war, fighting entirely through intermediaries. By the early 1980s, Iran began funding and helping create allied militant groups, most notably Hezbollah in Lebanon, to project power regionally. This strategy allowed Iran to physically close the distance to Jerusalem, establishing armed networks right against Israel's borders. These proxy forces created a massive geopolitical buffer, allowing Iran to strike regionally while keeping its homeland insulated. For nearly 40 years, this proxy structure acted as a complex system of deterrence. The violence was constant, but the unwritten rules kept the fighting below the threshold of an open war. By the 2000s, international alarm grew rapidly over Iran's expanding nuclear program, leading the UN, US, and Europe to impose severe economic sanctions. Israel repeatedly warned that an Iranian nuclear weapons capability would be an unacceptable threat to its survival. In 2010, the confrontation crossed into the digital realm. The Stuxnet computer worm infiltrated Iranian networks and caused physical destruction to their nuclear centrifuges. This cyberattack was widely attributed to the US and Israel. Diplomatic efforts provided a brief pause with the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal, which eased sanctions in exchange for strict limits on enrichment. But that fragile agreement was abruptly shattered when the United States withdrew in 2018. Tensions reached a boiling point in 2020 when a US drone strike in Iraq killed Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani. The resulting retaliation supercharged regional animosity. Taking the conflict into cyberspace and targeting strategic nuclear facilities stripped away the old geographic boundaries. The conditions for a direct military confrontation were set. Following the Gaza war, regional pressure peaked. In April 2024, Israel struck Iran's diplomatic compound in Damascus, Syria. Iran answered with a historic retaliation. They launched a massive drone and missile barrage straight at Israeli soil, forcing extensive air defense interventions to intercept the attack. This rapidly accelerated into the 2025 12-day war. Israel launched major strikes against Iranian military and nuclear facilities, and Iran fired back with heavy missile barrages of its own. The destruction in Damascus and the subsequent direct missile exchanges permanently broke the taboo of the shadow war. Decades of indirect deterrence had simply failed. By February 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated attacks against Iranian targets. Iran responded by unleashing drone strikes that spread across multiple countries in the Middle East. The fighting immediately spilled over into global commerce. Armed groups allied with Iran heavily disrupted oil shipping through the vital Strait of Hormuz, paralyzing global supply chains. This chart shows the sudden, sharp spike in global energy prices that hit markets worldwide. Running parallel to that economic shock was a devastating human toll, with thousands reported killed or displaced across the region. A preliminary US-backed ceasefire in June 2026 managed to pause the hostilities and reopen shipping routes. However, negotiations left the core disputes over sanctions and nuclear enrichment entirely unresolved. What began as an internal political shift in 1979 evolved through decades of proxy battles and nuclear standoffs into a global crisis. Is this conflict ending, or is a larger confrontation still ahead?